folks, and welcome. Thanks for joining. My name is Merit Bear, and I am a principal in the Office of the CISO, the Chief Information Security Officer here at AWS, Amazon Web Services. Thanks for coming to our reInvent talk. Today, we are going to be talking to you about how to leverage AWS partners in your efforts against ransomware. Dudi, could you introduce yourself, please?
So, of course, hi everyone. My name is Dudi Matot, and I'm the Global Security Segment Lead at AWS Partner Network, and happy to join you, everyone.
All right, great. I am coming to you from Miami here, where I'm on Tequesta, Miccosukee, and Creek land, and looking forward to engaging today.
So, I'm from the Bay Area and looking to talk about how we can how the AWS and Partner Solution provides business continuity and helps protect your customer business from ransomware attack. So we're going to spend some time together to talk about that. So what is ransomware? Ransomware is a malicious attack generated by hackers where they typically block access or restrict access to key information. They typically achieve that through injecting malware into the environment and block this sensitive information access while then asking ransom to be paid. Typically, there are two types of ransomware. The first one is locker, which basically revolves around the hacker locking out end users from gaining access to their devices or application. Whereas the second type is the crypto ransomware, where it's all about encrypting and compromising the target sensitive data and requires the end user for requiring a key to decrypt their own data.
Yeah, so there's generally two flavors these days, right? There's the kind where you're being locked out of the access to your own files, crypto locked or crypto deleted by the attacker. And there's also the kind where they're threatening to disclose because they've exfilled some files. In some sense, of course, ransomware is not new. It has been around since at least 1989. There was a famous conference that resulted in folks coming back with a disk that they would insert, and then it would lock up their files, and it would demand a ransom of $189 to be paid via check to a P.O. box in Panama. So this ended up being sort of the first documented instance, but there's lots of, kind of varied history on folks trying to leverage this. It's generally folks who are taking advantage of opportunistic, victims and who are basically leveraging it because it makes them money. So on some level, while this is nothing new, there's a conception called Sutton's Law, named after Willie Sutton, the famous bank robber. And it's called Sutton's Law because he was sort of attributed the quote of when someone asked, well, why do you rob banks? He said, well, that's where they keep the money. That's where the money is. And while he actually says he never even said that, it is attributed to him. And it's kind of become one of those rules of thumb, if you will, where we expect that folks will probably take the approach that leads them to, get a payout. And so these days, with the rise of cryptocurrency, with the ability to do things like mixing, it allows folks to, criminals and bad actors to take advantage of that. And so while the ability to get into your estate may not be really anything new, now there's a way to monetize it. And so I think that's really the crux of why we're seeing such an uptick in it lately.
Okay, so let's switch gear and see how you prepared your customers for a ransomware attack, and we can come up with a couple of questions that we need to look at when thinking about that. So, do you have a centralized identity management? Do you store and use secrets securely? Do you separate the workloads from production and the non-production environment? Do you use any kind of mechanism to keep people away from data? Do you have an incident response plan? So all these things you need to think about in advance while preparing yourself to those type of attacks. So that's so moving to the next slides. So ransomware more likely to happen if we were to think about what kind of triggers organization to be more susceptible to others when it comes to ransomware. Typically, we need to look into three main pillars. The first one would be the technical aspects. Do we have the right sets of skills dealing with cyber attack? As well as customers are heavily dependent on manual. So do we have those processes being automated? The second thing you need to think about is the human factor, which is the lack of awareness, since most of those attacks start with phishing attack. So do we have the enough internal awareness among our end users to avoid resulting in those exposures? And the third, and probably the most important one, is do we have a centralized department or security strategy that is able to prepare us from ransomware in kind of an holistic way?
Great. So, of course, one of the things that we're setting the stage here with is the idea that if you're working in cloud, a lot of these kind of traditional considerations around security are things that look different and or maybe even off your plate, right? So things like patching and the infrastructure itself. So, a lot of what we are covering on our side of the shared responsibility model are things that have inherent security benefits, things like the Nitro ecosystem, which is our custom hardware that has security inheritances built into it. Patching and some of these kind of legacy issues, although there are times that you are responsible for patching in cloud, there are also leveraging things like managed services. The best patching is the patching you don't have to do. Configuration and infrastructure devices, thinking through the ways that you are actually choosing to either connect to internet or find ways to augment your perimeter, right? And things that allow you to have more confidence in your posture, shifting your management of IT controls and automating those manual tasks. So really what we're talking about is that we kind of set the field here. You'll notice we're digging into some sports metaphors just to keep it fun. But thinking of AWS as setting the playing field here. And on top of that, we are, conceiving of this as a team sport. And since we're focused on partners, we're going to talk a little more about where partners come into that equation.
So as Meritz said, we'll move into the shared responsibility module, where kind of AWS is responsible for protecting the infrastructure that runs all the services offered in the AWS cloud. The customer responsibility is determined by the AWS cloud services the customer selects. You are, as a customer, responsible to managing the security of your data, the encryption, classifying your assets, using AWS identity management to apply the proper least privilege. This is where kind of our partners kick off to help you taking that off your shoulders. So in kind of continuing the sports metaphor, let me tell you about kind of an interesting offering that we offer through our marketplace with for ransomware, where we're leveraging one of our SI partners, which is Presidio, as a cloud consultant, and CrowdStrike as an ISV partner, and AWS Cloud Indoor is a native AWS service, in establishing a strong security and disaster recovery for our customers. Together, we came up, all three of us, the SIs, guiding and helping the customer deploy the solution and run an assessment, leveraging a NIST framework that will spend some time later to talk about, and helping them both on the recovery side through the native AWS service and protecting the endpoint through cloud and hybrid environment with endpoint solutions such as CrowdStrike.
Awesome. So one of the things that I like to come back to is the use of North Stars. So things that are, something that kind of remains true over time, although how you get there will look different. So some of the North Stars for your ransomware protection here are going to be how you manage your identity and access management. So multi-account strategy and governance, the use of ephemeral short-term credentials, which is to say, no hard-coded and persistent ones, hopefully. The use of storage backup and recovery, including our point-in-time recovery capabilities and the ability to lock backups and architect for high availability. Personally, I think that of the CIA triad, the confidentiality, integrity, availability gets too little attention in my view. So, we need to make things that work, and we need to make things that are consistent over time. And really, a lot of these best practices, or all of them in some sense, are things that you should be doing today anyway as a security shop, right? But they're especially poignant when we're talking about ransomware, which we know to be targeting your kind of continuity and resilience over time. And then finally is embracing immutability and ephemerality. So by this, I just mean kind of leaning into that cloud native way of approaching architectural design. So rather than security being something that we're bolting on after the fact, as you know, we're shifting left. There's a lot of embedded security in the way that we architect. And so thinking through how your network reachability or how your identity and permissioning and escalations go, those are all things that we're building in. And the way that we're building them in is often through templatizing. So things like a CloudFormation template, coming back to a Golden AMI. There are ways that we are embracing the ability to treat our architectures as cattle, not pets, and to actually come back to known good states because we have this immutability, ephemerality kind of dance where we can be less attached to any one particular deployment because we know we could kill it, spin up a new one, and come back to a known good state. And this is really a reflection of now that we're doing infrastructure as code, we can do security as code, and there is that kind of beauty in that ephemerality.
Now that we have discussed how we reduce the likelihood of ransomware getting in the door, let's now talk about what to do if it does manage to get in. And as a best practice, typically kind of customer tends to start that later, but the best recommendation is to start with the backup and recovery right from the beginning. So to be successful in setting a recovery strategy, it's important to work with the customer and understand the resilience level of each application. So the resilience level here is a combination of the recovery time objective, kind of the outage duration allowed per application, and the recovery point objective, which is kind of the data loss allowed per application. The graph that shows here in this deck illustrates the correlation between the recovery objective and the service cost. Obviously, for a low-cost solution, expect a longer recovery and vice versa. You can bring in AWS partners with this capability to help you navigate and build the recovery strategy together with you.
So one of the critical areas as we are moving from kind of more legacy considerations around how to prevent ransomware into cloud and how we manage that, of course, on some level, a lot of the traditional vectors, things like unpatched Windows servers, are just not the attack vector if you're in AWS. But one of the key components of your posture will be your credentials and your identity and access management. So this is a childhood photo of me fishing is my illusion here. Of course, I'm not even holding the fish, but what can you do? At any rate, the idea here is that regardless of the kind of actor, at this point, the primary vector of attack is phishing, PH phishing. And so keeping your identity guardrailed and limited and really trying to enforce least privilege over time and in increasing sort of continuous improvement kinds of ways is really helpful. So first, you start with the visibility that you gain in cloud. So the ability to, for example, tag all your assets and be able to enforce API level actions against them. Those then you can trim down and enforce over time with your privilege determinations using tools like Access Analyzer, which is from our automated reasoning group, a group of math PhDs who I fangirl. They are basically using provable methods, provable security to do reasoning. So now that we're doing infrastructure as code, as I've mentioned and kind of expanded upon a little, we are talking about actually parsing those permissions. So things that are written in JSON, let's say, we can actually be able to have a computer parse which permissions policy is able to be escalated or which IAM policy is more permissive. And so tools like IAM Access Analyzer give you more confidence in the ways that you have deployed and also suggest paths to prune and trim your permissions as you go. And then finally, we've got an aspect of policy enforcement. So things like SEPs and AWS organizations. This is, again, coming back to that kind of beauty of being in those cloud layers, because when you used to have to worry about whether your governance was being democratized down and really enforced at the human layer, because you had a binder with 100 pages of security policies, now you take your governance docs, you can turn those into something you've codified literally, and you can enforce them from a technical perspective. So when you're using something like AWS organizations for your multi-account governance, you can then use tools like SEPs, service control policies, and others, of course, to enforce the kinds of policy-driven judgments that you have made. So thinking about those identity and access controls, it comes from visibility to enforcement to policy. We're a little redundant here, but visibility to policy enforcement. And I think that given that identity is one of those that is kind of a constant refrain, right? You're going to have folks join your organization. You're going to have them move laterally to other roles. This is one of those that should be a continuous improvement cycle. So we should be taking the opportunity to prune, kind of reason about the permissions we've given, and have some source of truth around how we're going to manage those. All right. So as Judy mentioned, one of the ways that you'll want to start thinking about your ransomware protection plan, of course, is to start from the beginning with robust backup and restore processes. And by this, we mean, one, start by knowing your state, right? This is, again, kind of a trope, but it is so true that it's hard to have full visibility. And it's easier in cloud because we're really talking about knowing logically. So being able to put out calls and know the state of your domains. We should also be evaluating your data protection, looking at the criticality of your applications. As Judy mentioned, some of this will be business decision making around your cost and your risk profile and your decisions around how warm your storage and backup needs to be. But a lot of times, this is something that you get better at simply by being intentional about it. Identifying your tooling to bring up virtual machines and rehydrate data. I would add on that to that next bullet, the playbooks and the ability to test them, because identifying the tooling is one thing, but actually being able to have confidence that it's going to go according to your plan is really critical here. And that only comes with practice. So storing your backups and images in an isolated account, we're going to get into a little more detail on what that looks like. Of course, folks are kind of used to a traditional air gap, and you can emulate that in a logical form using cloud. Using different encryption keys and ensuring that everything is natively encrypted. So data at rest, this is going to be TLS SSL, and data in transit is going to be TLS SSL, and at rest, this will be AES 256. But basically in cloud, there's no excuse not to be natively encrypting all the things all the time. It's so easy and painless, and it really is a game changer. And then having your backups, as I mentioned, those kinds of air gap like capabilities that you're taking advantage of. So thinking through, what do you have, how will you recover, and then making sure that you exercise those to ensure that in the case of a bad day, you're ready to get back to a known good state.
Okay, so thank you, Barry. So what's kind of the tools available within AWS that can help you to accomplish all that kind of backup and recovery that we talked about? There are several tools provided by AWS, kind of the AWS backup for cloud native, AWS storage gateway for on-premise, the AWS cloud window for both cloud and on-premise, that in some extent help you with the air gap, and obviously kind of partner backup solution that we'll talk about in more details in coming slides. So many partner solutions integrate with AWS Storage Services API directly, providing additional flexibility around kind of your specific use case. Obviously, if you want to deep dive into the different offering, feel free to reach out, and we'll be happy to assign specialist SAs that can help you get more information about the different solution out there.
All right, great. So what you're really trying to do is to use an air gap-like secure backup account architecture. So you're going to be starting from the idea that you've got your data center, and then as you do this control plane security, you move from your staging account to a Vault account to a Vault Forensics account, when required, to a recovery account. And of course, then you can put on top some of this particular kind of locks and recovery mechanisms, for example, S3 object lock or S3 write once, read many. One of the conceptual frameworks that I think is important that I've alluded to earlier is this embracing of immutability and ephemerality. And so one of the ways to do this is to automate as much as you can from the processes that were commonly manual. So things like code deployment pipelines. So thinking through those security checks that you can build into your deployment pipelines so that you're actually preempting a lot of the insecurities that might have been passed down, and preventing the need to come back to a known good state in the first place. Then using things like CloudFormation or Terraform to build your infrastructure as code, and then you can easily kind of build upon that, right? Add more deployments, or adjust your permissions, or whatever you're looking to do over time that you can preserve in this templatized form and be able to come back to. And that allows you to build an immutable infrastructure, and to also take advantage of the limitations that are kind of yours to grasp when it comes to reducing human access. So using tools like Omni Builder and auto-scaling groups and CloudWatch logs to ensure that configuration doesn't change. Obviously, config rules play a role in this, but having the ability to do that auto remediation through that visibility and really kind of have it be a virtuous cycle where you come full circle.
Okay, the next thing is let's talk about hardening an OS and an application. And the goal of hardening is essentially reduce the security risk or the attack surface, eliminating your kind of the attack vector and considering by removing unsuspicious application or permission or access to attackers and malware that have fewer opportunity to gain a foothold within your environment. Kind of out of the box, we offer kind of many operating systems that are that can be configured or hardened. Through Marketplace, you can purchase a CIS, pre-hardened AMI. And in addition to hardening your system, you also want to run endpoint protection software. There are several excellent third-party endpoint protection available on Marketplace, such as CrowdStrike, Trend Micro, SentinelOne, and a few many other solutions.
One of the common tools that we suggest folks continue to benchmark against is this NIST cybersecurity framework, right? So while it is kind of timeless because it is generalizable, it's also helpful to, I think, chart your kind of life cycle and how you're putting your controls to map to this. And of course, partners make some relevant plays in each of these stages of the framework. So let's dive into that a little bit more. I'm thinking of our sports illusion here, continuing in the idea that you're kind of using partners to leverage different muscle groups, right? So having the right tool for the right job, as we would always say, but also allowing, your trainer to kind of help you build those muscle groups, you being the customer, and allowing the partner to kind of help you model good behavior and also perhaps help you package it so that it's something that you can consume more readily. So again, let's start with identity, because I think that this is really important, both from the identity layers of how and where you're doing your authorization and authentication, but also identifying your assets and how you know what you have so that you can make sure that you're able to chart and not allow folks to take advantage of your lack of visibility here, right? So on our side, obviously you're accessing things either through the console or through APIs and other mechanisms, but being able to do a full visibility on your estate and then also having the ability to do queries and to work within your logging and monitoring, as we're going to get into a little bit more here. There are some partners here that are relevant as we identify and also go through your environments and entry points, of course, running on AWS and allowing folks to have more confidence in the ways that they are deploying.
So after you kind of identify, we move into the protect phase. AWS offers the access control, identity management. This offering can protect your AWS infrastructure, assets, and associated facilities by essentially restricting access to that physical or logical assets. And only authorized users or processes or device would be able to access. We also offer kind of through third party and through our partners more kind of solution in different spaces, like helping you with the governance and privilege access and many other kind of solution spaces and use cases.
Great. One of the ways that, of course, cloud is a real differentiator and is the ability to do a lot of login monitoring and detective controls. So, for example, internally, we are very permissive with our employees, but we put a lot of alarming and thresholding, and that comes from those detective controls. So being able to make kind of insights that are actionable out of the wealth of information that you will have here. So this can come from all sorts of outlets. This could be CloudTrail, which is every API call attempted, let alone went through. This might be CloudWatch, which marks things like CPU usage, Inspector, GuardDuty, which is our IDS, IPS, Macie, which hunts for potentially sensitive data, and so on and so forth. And so I think keeping this in your plan actually requires you to not only decide how you're going to get your source of truth, but also how you're going to put actions against them. And there are some really great partners that are allowing you to take more advantage of the ways that you can put that into your security pipeline and ensure that you're actioning the insights that you're getting as you take that information in and are able to determine, increasingly it is not that there is a rogue server under someone's desk. We're really talking about the ability to logically know what's happening in your environment, but you have so much data often that it's really hard to decipher a signal from noise. And so having confidence that you're collecting the kinds of data that you need to make inferences and be able to then put those kind of literal automations on top of them. So all of the automations that I'm referring to are Lambdas under the hood, which, by the way, is the same thing that powers your Alexa, right? So taking advantage of those kinds of technologies that then enable your behaviors to be more streamlined, more automated, and then allow you to scale.
So moving on to the respond piece. So once you detected an anomaly or outlier, how do you respond to that? So if you use the incident manager capabilities from AWS System Manager to build an effective and automated incident management and response solution at a security event, then you're covered. Otherwise, start off by staying calm and taking the time to integrate and use thoroughly, and kind of follow the plan that you outline. And we also offer, so we have different services that Merit already talked about, kind of from the Lambda AWS Security Hub, where kind of we help you to get a single pane of glass and prioritize those events, and AWS config and config rules to automate. We also offer a set variety of partners, which allows you to respond to these events on your endpoint and on your kind of hybrid environment. On the recover side of the business, though, despite you preventative, you still need to have a recover kind of system in place. So you need to have a plan in place that would minimize any possible distraction. For example, if an hacker takes down on a specific instance, it is possible to replace it rapidly with a new AMI through AWS Lambda and kind of CloudWatch, and automate those recovery using different services such as AWS Backup or AWS Cloud Indoor. In addition, our kind of sets of partners in this space, Rubrik, NetApp, Cohesity, etc., offer you the ability to recover from that event quickly and with minimal disruption.
Here we are getting more into kind of the bones of how partners may play a role in helping customers with their ransomware defense. So there's a lot of different categories here. Again, kind of thinking of these in terms of muscle groups. Of course, they are often related and or attached to one another. But a lot of these are relevant for, ransomware protection writ large. And certainly as folks are moving from an on-prem to a cloud native model, it can be really helpful to leverage partners who may have particular expertise and or particular kind of packages that allow folks to quickly adopt and take advantage of their capabilities. And of course, those partners are leveraging AWS capabilities and running on AWS a lot of the time. So in terms of our wide selection of security partners, of course, we could dig into these. I think one of the real beauties of our platform is that it is such an open world. So if you're a security provider today who thinks you should be on the partner network, you probably should. Look into that. It is one that we are trying to serve customers first, and we are very open. We're very ready for folks to help our customers to do it in the way that meets them where they are.
So, just to complete on that thought, a couple of months ago, we just launched a new MSSP competency. Essentially, it's an open platform for both our technology partners and consulting partners to offer kind of a 24/7 managed services, either based on AWS native services or on our third-party security competency partner. On the next slide, you'll see a couple of those MSSP partners who are already part of the competency, who do offer protect and monitor overview solutions, also targeting around ransomware use case. So definitely take a look into that.
Great. In general, I think just sort of as a roundup here, some of the best practices, and as I've mentioned, a lot of these are kind of getting your house in order in general, right? But they're going to be especially targeted toward ransomware protection, since that is top of mind these days. So patching and hardening, continuously striving for least privilege, leveraging a multi-account strategy, and being kind of cognizant of how those operate and taking advantage of the tooling that is provided, and using network segmentation to limit the scope of the impact, developing and exercising an instant response plan, and then performing self-assessments to ensure that you're aware of your state of play. And I think, the idea here is that this is not an exhaustive list, right? But a lot of these are the areas that we see as pain points through which we can then observe that folks may have not done as much as they could, because there's always a business imperative of what to get done today, and I get that. So I think, if anything, I would encourage folks to use the current kind of push to defend against ransomware to push your organization to mature in a lot of ways that are potentially overdue anyway, and to embrace the ability of our partners to augment your internal resources and even augment the offerings that we offer natively to help folks to consume them, help them package them, help understand where their risk lies, and then help them to decrease that risk profile.
So to conclude, I'm using this kind of quote from the cybersecurity advisor for National Security Council, coming out of the executive order. So just giving you the magnitude of the ransomware problem that goes beyond just kind of the private and public sector that actually influence and impact our national security. So it's really a big issue out there that we all want to take a look into.
I think that, it's no surprise that we've seen attention at many layers across the globe. But this is one example of when, Anne, who is a brilliant woman working on the National Security Council, issued a White House memo recently encouraging folks to take measures against ransomware, just knowing that this is top of mind, and that especially during COVID, it has been a real pain point for industries and for healthcare organizations. And we're really cognizant of that. And this is sort of like that, coming back to that theme of the stronger together element. It's something that's top of mind for all of us, from the policy folks down to the operators. And coming back to one of the points that I had touched upon earlier, I think this quote is a catchy one from one of our security engineers, Beetle. But the idea that even if you think you've got everything in place, make sure you exercise it, because there are two ways to learn incident response, and one will be chosen for you. And what this really means to say is not just that it's really important to do all of the exercising and tabletops and run books that you need, which is true, but also that you may believe that you have them in place, and it's not until you really run them that you find out. And so I think ensuring that you have that kind of pragmatist approach where you try something and see if it works and improve it over time. We do this, obviously. We have mechanisms within our organization in AWS Security to ensure that when something happens that shouldn't have, or vice versa, that we have a way to retrace our steps, ensure that we're learning from it, and get better over time.
So here's kind of a case study from a typical customer. In this case, a customer in the education business. So while working with one of our partners on putting a recovery strategy, so while doing that, an attacker was able to exploit a vulnerability in one of his instances, and the attacker was able to move laterally and spread the malware to additional server. Even though Cloud Indoor was not fully set up at the time of the attack, the customer was still able to recover the application data. So even with a partial solution, still the magnitude of the attack could be much worse if not having this recovery system in place that our partner helped him to deploy.
Great. So we're just rounding the corner here, and we look forward to engaging with folks in the future. We're going to have our contact information and look forward to this being part of a longer effort, of course. But we have some marketing, efforts underway, including a white paper that also hinges against that NIST framework and may be helpful for your organization, and a few other artifacts that we're going to be able to highlight for you. And we also look forward to helping you to create joint offerings with us. So feel free to reach out. Judy, you want to talk a little more about the security competency here?
Yeah, so feel free to reach out to talk about more on the solution and also on the competency. Mention the MSSP competency, couple of slides, and also the security competency. We have tens of partners already listed, and I encourage you to go and look and submit and become one of our kind of AWS competency partner who offer this unique solution. So let's come together and create this great joint offering to help our customers get more comfortable and secure. So, and thank you, Merit, for this time together to really enjoy.
Yes, we are in it together here, and we look forward to engaging with folks. For those who are coming in person, we look forward to continuing the conversation. And thank you again for tuning in. Lots of good work to be done, and we look forward to your feedback and to your continued collaboration. Thanks again.
Yeah, thank you very much.